I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their thoughtful testimony. Mr. Alec, like you said, I mean, you have to start with information. And I would argue that the first step in solving any problem is you have to admit you have one. And the reason we try and grapple with some kind of metrics, whether it's pages, whether it's dollars, is we're trying to describe a problem that exists. Now, I realize they're all imperfect measures. I was trying to get my staff to come up with the exact numbers, but let me lay out part of the problem. Is Congress now passes frameworks for the regulatory agencies to write the laws and the rules and regulations. We all agree a job of the federal government should be providing a legal and regulatory framework to provide certainty for our economy so you understand what the rules of the road are, like a uniform commercial code. The problem is we've passed so many, they're so confusing, they're conflicting, it's not providing that kind of certainty, not by any stretch of the imagination. Two examples, both Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, when they were written, they were a few 100,000 words. I don't have the exact numbers right now, a couple 100,000 words apiece. Last time I looked, Dodd-Frank, in terms of regulatory number of words, is over 15 million. Obamacare was over 12 million. So again, those are the large metrics to try and describe the problem that our private sector is trying to grapple with as they're trying to grow and produce good-paying jobs. Anecdotally, I've had small banks in Wisconsin come up to me, small bankers, and say, you know, Senator, I had to lay off a loan officer because I had to hire a compliance officer. I'm having banks say I can't survive as a single branch bank anymore. I've got to consolidate just to be able to afford and comply with all the regulations. So this is, whether it's anecdotally or whether it's from a macro sense, this is just a real problem. I think one of the problems we have in terms of regulatory agencies, and again, I am very impressed with the quality of the federal workforce. That's just true. I'm a limited government guy, but I'm impressed with the people, the dedication, their intelligence. The problem is I'm concerned about their experience. How many regulators, what percentage, and I don't think anybody has this, but I want one of you to speak to the problem of regulators who have very little experience in the private sector understanding, for example, having the George McGovern moment. If you remember when Senator McGovern ended up starting up a bread and breakfast, and I think his comment was, if I'd only known what all these rules and laws and regulations, how difficult it was to comply. So can somebody speak to just the private sector experience that's lacking in the regulatory community? Mr. Holtz-Eakin? You're looking away, but
I don't have any metrics, which is what you'd like to know, but certainly the anecdotal evidence is exactly what you described, that those who walk from one side of this line to the other are stunned at how misinformed they were about the burdens that the regulations impose on people.
Well, with respect, I think that that's one of the reasons we have public participation in rulemaking. Agencies have to say what it is they intend to do, and they have to provide all of the data and all of the analyses that they rely on. And then there's an opportunity for comment, and at least during my tenure at OIRA, and I had some private sector experience before I went into the government, my experience was that businessmen would come in and say, there's a problem, and we would listen and we would respond. And it is not a closed, mindless exercise. So I can't give you a percentage, but I can give you a cultural attitude of openness and inclusion for information.
Sir.
Just to add one sentence here, part of the problem is the intersection of different regulations. So what happens is that the regulatory agencies focus on when they're developing regulations, they think about the impact of that single regulation. They don't think about the overlaps and the intersections and the problems that it causes with other regulations. And when I talk to business people, a lot of what they complain about, they can deal with any single regulation. It's when they start layering on top of each other that it becomes a real problem. And that we have to think about that as we sort of think about what we do in response to this. It's the intersection, not just in the federal level, but the state and local level as well.
Yeah, it's the conflicting regulations. I mean, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I mean, that type problem. By the way, I don't think anybody here is claiming this is just an Obama administration problem. This has been a problem as the fourth branch of government has grown, you know, exponentially in terms of, I would say, exponentially in terms of the regulatory burden over the years, just on a bipartisan basis. Ms. Cassidy, you mentioned about the notice and comment period. I think we've witnessed, I don't have the exact numbers, but I've seen numbers in the past, I think we've witnessed lack of notice and lack of comment, and I actually want to ask somebody to explain the substantive rule requirement in terms of notice and comment period.
I laugh only because I devote 2 full classes in my admin law class to this. But the APA is quite clear that where there is a substantive rule that is binding and has the force and effect of law, that there must be notice and opportunity for comment. The APA explicitly carves out general statements of policies and interpretive rules. And as to those, there is no requirement for notice and comment, although OMB has made a policy that if it is a significant statement of policy with significant economic impact, there should be a modicum of opportunity for public participation. Now, this case, that issue is actually before the Supreme Court today. It was argued in December in the Perez case, and we should have a decision by the end of the year as to whether those words in the APA are in fact true.
No, a federal judge did actually rule.
He did.
I think last week that President Obama's executive actions as regards to deferred action we'll call it executive amnesty because it's easier to say, was a substantive rule and required notice and comment period, and there was none. Isn't that correct?
That is
would you challenge
yes.
that interpretation?
Yes, I would. I think the Obama administration will be challenging that, and I think that, in fact, his view of the law is not correct.
Can anybody else comment on that? Anybody else qualified to speak to that? Mr. Ellick, you were wanting to chime in.
Oh,
on something else.
I'm sorry. On your earlier question, I wanted to mention that I worked in a regulatory agency, and the sum total of my prior private sector experience was cleaning hamster cages at a Woolworth store and dressing up as Santa Claus at Christmas in the same place.
That's better than none, by the way.
But I think even if you have regulatory agencies largely staffed by folks like us on the panel who have pursued pretty much analytical, policy-oriented careers, there are certain fundamental questions that come out of how to do good policy analysis that agencies ought to be asking and answering that they aren't always asking, like, hey, what's the root cause of the problem we're trying to solve? And so I'm not sure if you have to have a lot of people with private sector experience, but you at least ought to have people who know how to do good policy analysis and do it.
And value good information. Thank you, Senator Carper.
Thanks. This has been, I said to Senator